You've probably driven through Research Triangle Park a dozen times and seen exactly what they want you to see. Glass buildings, pine trees, a Cisco sign, maybe a Pfizer campus off to one side. The kind of place where people carry lanyards and talk about Q3 in the elevator. But somewhere past those lobbies, past the badge readers and the loading docks and the air handlers that make that low hum you can never quite place, something is alive. Not in the normal lab sense, not centrifuges and beakers and that smell of ethanol that follows you out to the parking lot. Alive in a completely different way. We're talking about insects. Thousands of them, maybe millions. Bred on purpose, scaled deliberately, and sitting inside buildings that look, from Route 54, like every other corporate campus in the Triangle. And I know how that sounds, but this isn't a fringe thing. Insect farming is quietly becoming one of the most seriously funded areas in agricultural biotech. And RTP, with its mix of university pipelines and pharma infrastructure and startup capital, has turned into one of the more active clusters in the country for exactly this kind of work. You just had no idea it was there, so let's go inside. What's actually in there? First, let's kill the mental image you're already carrying around, because it's probably wrong. You're not picturing a converted warehouse somewhere off T.W. Alexander Drive, where rows of black soldier fly larvae are being raised in climate-controlled trays, fed on pre-consumer food waste, and harvested on a weekly cycle to produce high-protein animal feed. But that's one version of what's happening. You're not picturing a research unit inside a biotech building where scientists are picking apart the gut microbiome of mealworms, trying to understand what makes them more efficient at turning organic matter into usable biomass. But yeah, that's happening too. And you're definitely not picturing a startup that took the same controlled environment infrastructure that cannabis growers figured out, the humidity sensors, the LED spectrum dialing, the automated feeding systems, and pointed it at crickets for human food ingredients. But that's real. Insect farm is doing a lot of work as a phrase. What it actually covers is a whole spectrum, from basic entomological research all the way to full commercial protein production. And RTP sits at multiple points on that spectrum at the same time. Why? Because of something the Triangle does better than almost anywhere else. It collapses the distance between a university lab and a commercial operation. Research coming out of NC State's entomology and ag science programs doesn't just sit in a journal. It moves. It gets licensed, spun out, piloted, and scaled, often within a few miles of where it started. That's not a coincidence. That's literally what RTP was built to do. The science part, and it's actually wild. Here's what makes insect farming genuinely interesting, separate from any food trend angle. Insects are shockingly efficient at turning feed into protein. A cricket needs roughly 12 times less feed than cattle to produce the same amount of protein. Way less water, almost no methane. And you can stack them vertically in a building the size of a suburban office suite. That 12 times number is what got researchers' attention about a decade ago, because when you start modeling global protein demand over the next 30 years, what it actually takes to feed 9 or 10 billion people without finishing off what's left of the planet's arable land, the options thin out fast. Insects keep being one of the better ones. So the research accelerated, not just in the Triangle, but across the country. What's different about RTP is what happened after the research, the translation into operations you can actually run at scale. And that's where the infrastructure here becomes the real story. The controlled environment facilities that pharma companies use for cell culture, adaptable for insect rearing, the cold chain logistics that already exist for biotech manufacturing. They work for larvae and dried protein meal. The regulatory familiarity, RTP, companies already have with FDA and USDA processes. That matters enormously when you're trying to get an insect-derived ingredient approved for animal feed, or eventually a grocery shelf. Nobody sat down and decided RTP was going to become an insect biotech hub. It just became one because everything needed to build that industry was already sitting here. The companies you've never heard of, this is where it gets specific and a little strange. If you dig through business registrations, SBIR grants, and startup pitch decks that have come out of the Triangle over the last 8 years, a pattern shows up. Small companies with names that sound vaguely pharmaceutical. Operations tucked into shared lab spaces and research parks on the quieter edges of RTP. Job listings asking for experience in controlled environment agriculture or insect rearing protocols and this one is real, the FRAS management systems, which means exactly what you think it means. These aren't household names. Most of them don't have a consumer product yet. A lot of them are still in pilot phase, running operations that fit in a single climate-controlled room, dialing in feed ratios and mortality rates before they try to go bigger. But the money is real. The USDA has been funding insect protein research through its Agriculture and Food Research Initiative for years. The Department of Defense has funded black soldier fly work specifically for converting food waste at forward operating bases. Several venture funds that have historically focused on triangle biotech have quietly started putting money into agricultural insect companies. This isn't something that's coming down the road. It's already here, already operating, already staffed, just at a scale and a visibility level that keeps it completely off the radar of most people living 5 miles away from it. Why RTP specifically? Fair question. Why here and not, say, the Bay Area, where ag tech gets way more press? A few reasons, and they stack. The first is NC State. The College of Agriculture and Life Sciences has one of the most active applied entomology programs in the country. The work coming out of there on black soldier fly biology, on feed conversion, on using insects in integrated waste management, it doesn't stay academic. It gets commercialized. And when it does, it tends to land in RTP because that's where the lab-to-market infrastructure lives. The second is what you might call the pharma hangover. RTP built itself on pharmaceutical manufacturing. When GlaxoSmithKline and Bayer and Biogen set up here, they brought a whole generation of people know how to run clean, controlled, regulated production environments. When some of those people looked at agricultural biotech as the next wave, they brought those instincts with them. Running an insect rearing facility isn't the same as running a pharmaceutical clean room, but the overlap in how you think about quality, environmental controls, and process documentation is bigger than you'd expect. The third is geography. The triangle is close enough to the agricultural backbone of eastern North Carolina that supply chain questions are actually answerable. Where does feed come from? Where does the finished product go? How do you interface with existing processors? Those are solvable problems here. In a way they wouldn't be if you were trying to do this in downtown San Francisco. Stack all three, and you get a place where insect farming isn't just possible, it's genuinely logical. What you do with this, so what does any of this mean for you? If you live in the Triangle, it means the region's identity as an innovation hub is broader and weirder than the usual tech and pharma story gives it credit for. RTP has always been about placing bets on emerging science before the rest of the world catches up. In the 60s, that was solid-state electronics. In the 80s, pharmaceuticals. In the 90s and 2000s, networking and software. Right now, one of the bets on the table is insect protein. The idea that a 21st century food problem might get solved by a very old, very simple organism being raised very precisely in a building you've passed 100 times without thinking twice about it. If you're thinking about this from an investment angle, it's still early. Most of the companies in this space are pre-revenue or just getting into early revenue. The regulatory path for insect-derived ingredients in human food is still being mapped. The industry is going to go through the same consolidation and shakeout that every emerging AG tech sector does. Not every company operating right now is going to make it to the other side. But the underlying science isn't going anywhere. The efficiency numbers don't change. The protein demand curve doesn't reverse. And the infrastructure that makes the Triangle a good place to build this kind of company isn't going away either. The insect farms hidden inside RTP aren't hidden because anyone's trying to hide them. They're hidden because most of us don't have a mental model yet for what this industry looks like, and what kind of building it lives in, what the parking lot smells like on a Tuesday morning, what it means when a place known for pharmaceuticals and semiconductors quietly starts scaling black soldier flies inside a nondescript office complex off Alexander Drive. But you've got that model now, and next time you're driving through on Route 54, past the IBM campus, past the Biogen sign, past the pine trees that were there before any of these buildings existed, you'll know that somewhere past a badge reader you'll never see. In a room that looks like any other room from the outside, something is very much alive. And somebody put it there on purpose.